Welcome to Jumpstart Your Joy. This week on the show, I am very excited to have the Reverend Dr. Lauren Artress on. Welcome to the podcast, Lauren.
Thank you very much. It's great to be here.
Yes, I am so excited to have you on because you have worked with the Labyrinth for years and written many great books, including this latest one, The Path of the Holy Fool, which I have enjoyed. And it's such a treat to have you come on and talk about the Labyrinth and your work and how you found your way to it.
Well, I'm happy to do that. It's been quite a journey for sure.
Yes. Yeah. And I love that we'll unpack some of the parallels there of the journey of a labyrinth and the journey of our lives. So before we get there, though, would you please tell us, what did you love most as a child or in school? What were your earliest sparks of joy?
Yes, definitely nature. Paula, definitely nature. We lived way out in kind of, at that time, rural Ohio, meaning, everything was a post office box and there were no sidewalks and you had your own wells for water, about 30 miles outside of Cleveland. And luckily, it was just a beautiful area. We lived right on the Chagrin River which was earlier on indigenous Blackfoot tribe lived there. And so we would find flints and grinding stones in the garden, and we had a victory garden, and I remember one specific moment of just pure joy was in the fall digging up potatoes out of the ground. And here's this cluster of wonderful, I guess they would be russet potatoes. It was just a moment of joy. There were many like that, but nature was definitely, and still is, a place where I can be nurtured.
Yeah, that took me back now. My childhood, at least 5 years of it, was in and around Minneapolis, Minnesota. And I had a memory of going into the forest and finding, I don't know if it was honeysuckle or something, but you could like break it off and like kind of take a sip of the nectar from it. Like that was fun too. But it engaged all the senses, right? Kind of like the potatoes, probably, like there was a lot of sensory interaction there.
That's right. Yeah. And revelation is like, wow, this is right here for us and embracing us. And, and it's so important. This is part of what we need to do, is help everybody get back to an understanding of how nature nurtures and supports us. Rather than mistreating it or not understanding it.
And kind of the discovery. I can see there's going to be some really fun parallels here about like the discovery and the unfolding of things in our lives. Could you explain how you found your way to a labyrinth and what that journey was like for you?
Sure. Let me first say for our listeners is that let me describe a labyrinth.
Please, yes, that'd be a great place to start. Thank you.
That's important. A lot of times people confuse a labyrinth with a maze and not know that they're really diametrically opposite.
Right.
A maze is a cognitive puzzle. A labyrinth usually is a large circle, if we're talking about pavement or church labyrinths, on the ground, flat across, and it has one path that leads in a very circuitous way into center. Mm-hmm. And the labyrinth that I'm thinking of, I have it right here handy.
Yes.
But you can see the one path.
Yeah.
And so you can see what I mean by a very circuitous way, and leads to center. And that's what makes it a meditation tool, is because you just put one foot in front of the other and trust the path, which is such a great metaphor, especially right now in these uncertain times.
Yes. And I love that you just showed a hand labyrinth. I've loved the interaction I've had with a handheld labyrinth, and that surprised me completely. But yeah, how did you find your way to that Chartres labyrinth in France?
The whole thing feels very fortuitous, or it feels guided to me. I happen to be teaching at General Theological Seminary with Alan Jones, who was appointed Dean of Grace Cathedral in San Francisco. And so I never even applied for the job. And being canon pastor of Grace Cathedral was a plum job in the Episcopal Church. And at that time, I was doing psychotherapeutic practice, pastoral counseling, and I had hints, though, that my life was going to change. I had that partly because of my vision quest to Uluru in Australia, which is in the Path of the Holy Fool. That experience kept kind of opening up, and so I had this invitation to live in San Francisco and be at Grace Cathedral. And soon after I arrived there, I received a very large grant from Lawrence S. Rockefeller, and that gave me the funds to be able to help Grace Cathedral develop a Center for Spirituality, and it was called Quest, Grace Cathedral Center for Spiritual Wholeness. And there were programming paths, 4 of them, and they all led to the Labyrinth. They led me to the Labyrinth. Creativity as a spiritual path, that's one of them. The finding and seeking the feminine and the divine, rediscovering the mystical traditions, and the marriage of Eastern and Western traditions. And so all of those just kind of led me to the Labyrinth. But as you know, it was not an easy path. The Labyrinth really became, I knew I was searching for something because we were in the beginning and the middle, certainly not the end, of the AIDS epidemic.
Right.
1987, we had our first person in the congregation die of some kind of strange illness, and early on that was called GRID, gay-related immune deficiency, just like now we're feeling our way, more research is helping us understand. But at that time, like now, people were frightened, and my job was to start, all the programs I could for the worried well, for the dear parents coming to San Francisco to be with their dying son or daughter, certainly son in the beginning and later daughter. Yeah. And so it was a really challenging time, and we needed something. We needed something because people couldn't talk about what they were going through. It was too deep, it was too frightening, it was too painful, and it certainly parallels to our time right now. And so I was ready to leave the cathedral. That was not my work. And, one way to find your work is to know what's not your work. Yeah. I mean, we had, in '89, along with the earthquake, we had 92 people die in the congregation. Now understand that Grace Cathedral is a big civic cathedral, so if you're in trouble, people would come whether they're part of the congregation or not. But the larger San Francisco area, 92 funerals in one year for that one illness. I took a sabbatical and thinking, what's my next step? What's my next step? It's a great question. It's a great Labyrinth question, too.
It is. Next step. Yep.
And so then I went back to work with Jean Houston. And Jean is author of many books, 40 books or so, a psychologist, a philosopher. And she, at that time, I worked with her in '85 for a whole year. Mm-hmm. So this was kind of coming home. Okay, I'll just dip back in and see. And Jean's always generous and said, sure, come on, And then that's when they introduced the Labyrinth. But they just taped a big old 11 circuit medieval labyrinth, which is the other name for the Chartres Labyrinth, right, on the floor. And that was my first introduction.
Wow.
And it was a terrifying experience. It was a great experience. Yeah. All of that. And I think it was an anxious experience for me because, in all fairness to myself, I think there was definitely a part of me that knew I was stepping into a huge change in my life.
Right.
Huge. And I had a dream that night even, after the walking it, and I walked it about 3 times later in the evening, maybe 1 o'clock, 1 a.m. something, and went back to my cabin and had this amazing dream, which was really helpful. That signaled change. Mm. And then I realized, well, it sent me over to Chartres. We did research there, and a lot of times people think that the Chartres Labyrinth has been open to the public, and if they go over right then now, they'll find it open. No, it's been closed probably since the French Revolution, 1792, 93. And there are occasions. BBC recorded a special on the cathedral, and they didn't have chairs on it then. But ordinarily, they have chairs on it. Mm-hmm. In tourist season, now they're opening it on Fridays. And so it's been a long 25-year relationship of kind of introducing the Labyrinth through Grace Cathedral first. In 1997, we had the rector, the chanoine, as they say in French, the rector or the dean of the cathedral, come to Grace Cathedral. Wow. And it's his first time to the United States. And show him the work we're doing with the Labyrinth. Live music in the evenings on Wednesday, the third Wednesday, and silence on Sundays, the first Sunday of the month. And So they became, and they're beginning certainly to open their labyrinths. But again, it just felt like I was going down a highway with every light was just turning green. So I came back to Grace Cathedral. We were down our hands and knees. Oh, by the way, just by synchronicity, 6 people from the congregation of Grace Cathedral happened to be in France at the same time.
As when you were walking the Chartres Labyrinth?
Well, and I said, come on, and this was August 5th, 1991, not that I remember the date or anything. And the 6 of us went in. We knew it was under chair. We knew we didn't have permission, but they didn't respond to correspondence because there wasn't, Francois Legault, the dean, was not in his office yet. He wasn't in that position. And so we moved the chairs.
Yeah.
276 of them, and walked the labyrinth. And so that was really a signal for me. It was an amazing experience. And then that was like, yeah, we need to have the labyrinth in Grace Cathedral.
Yes.
And so it just everything just kept opening up. Why? Because the labyrinth wants to come back into our awareness.
Right. Yeah. Well, and I love that you spoke of some of the liminal space that it seemed was popping up for you even in the times right before you were walking the labyrinth or after you'd first walked it, because it's super interesting. I actually had a very similar experience. I think I first found one, I was on a retreat at San Damiano, and they have an outdoor labyrinth there for people at Stanville, California. And I walked it, I think 2 or 3 times the first evening, and it was at twilight, and then also had this very like, I got to get back down there. Like, I don't know what I just experienced, but I got to do that again. It's there, like, kind of all by myself in the dark of night. I'm out there walking a labyrinth and going, what is this? And then proceeded to have other experiences there near the labyrinth there that very much was directing me in ways that I mean, I can't even really verbalize all of it because it's in a different zone probably for me, but so interesting what happens. Would you talk a little bit, because I know some of what you talk about in The Path of the Holy Fool is about that divine imagination. I feel like that's what's coming into play here maybe. Like, what happens when we say yes to those things that we allow ourselves to imagine or believe, and how can that help with our path?
Mm-hmm. Right. And that is what's happening, I think. I think that the labyrinth is coming forth to help people, not only during these really chaotic times, to offer a sure path,
right?
Something you can trust, something you can do that's meditative, that brings you into your presence, and often into, you could say, capital P presence. That there's some sense of guidance that comes from walking the labyrinth. Now, we're talking about archetypal labyrinths. You know, at least in my mind, there's a lot of contemporary labyrinths that are coming in, which is wonderful. Mm-hmm. But the one that I know and is my heart song is the labyrinth from Chartres Cathedral.
Yeah.
As I mentioned already, the 11th Circuit medieval labyrinth. But it does. It provides guidance. It's so important to realize that walking for many of us is a huge help to quiet the mind.
Yes.
And, you know, I always describe myself as a failed meditator. I mean, I actually could do sitting meditation as long as my stress level didn't go up. Oh, great, that's fine, yeah. Well, then in the middle of the AIDS epidemic, the beginning, when the fear was rampant and everything was going on, and I was responsible for putting in some programs and doing a lot of hospital and chaplaincy work. Wow, you know, it just was the way I needed to go. Mm-hmm. And so walking, meditation, because you're using your body, you know, discharging all that energy that you're trying to sit on, literally, at least for me when my stress is high. And so it does allow us to go into that in-between world. It allows us to move beyond thought and have our thoughts support our process of guidance, of opening, of quieting. In The Path of the Holy Fool, you know, I'm using the Grail legend as a metaphor for the whole thing. Right. And the metaphor in that legend is the Grail Castle. It's the invisible, visible world coming together. And of course, you know, Parsifal happens upon the Grail Castle. It appears out of nowhere. And that's that feeling in the labyrinth. It's like, whoa, deep insights, thoughts that clarify. And often people hear guidance. Have you ever had that experience?
Yes. Usually just a word or two, but or a sense of almost the universe kind of chuckling at me like, oh, I see what you think. Like, yeah, let's try and rework that. Yeah, I definitely have heard things. It's amazing. And until you had actually said that, I've attended for the audience your facilitator training, which is outstanding and amazing. And until you'd said that, I just thought, that was just me imagining. But to hear that other people have that experience was very interesting to me.
Yeah, well, there's actually a name for it, auditory. It's in the Christian tradition, it's called audition. Like, an actor goes for an audition. Yeah. But and it's long lost because people are frightened of these kind of things. Maybe less so now as we search more and as we try to deepen our awareness of living with the mystery of being an earthling on planet Earth. Right. Is really beginning to touch people's lives. But a lot of people hear guidance, or it might be a sentence, or it might be a stanza from a hymn.
Wow.
Yeah. Or a quote from a psalm. So it's fascinating. But yes, people can find guidance. But why? Because they can finally quiet their minds enough to listen deeply.
Yeah. Yes. And I think it's so true. I mean, so I love a good centering prayer meditation because you are acknowledging, and I can link up to one if people are curious what that is, but you are acknowledging your thoughts and actively watching kind of yourself push them aside, or at least that's how I do it. But even that can be too, even if I just go on a walk, not on a labyrinth, I find myself being able to kind of let go of some of the noise. And so I think it's really interesting. And I'm grateful that you've brought up that maybe a sitting meditation isn't something that works for everybody, and that this is another way to experience that ability to kind of go into the internal landscape in a way that maybe you couldn't if you're, I don't know, it's too much to just try and sit and still your mind.
Yeah. And not that I'm against sitting meditation by any means. It's just something I couldn't do when my stress level is up. But also a lot of Westerners, we're having trouble. We don't even know what a quiet mind is anymore. And so to really be able to bring that back into our lives through walking. And of course, the Buddhists have walking meditation. They walk usually in a straight line and do a discipline of one step with one breath. Whereas the labyrinths, I think the most important thing is to find your natural pace.
Yes.
And move into your own flow, which is very refreshing as well.
Yes. Yeah. And even just the permission and invitation to find your own cadence. Like there's so many things about living in our society and our world right now that there's I don't know. I feel like we get a lot of messaging of all the shoulds of it should look like this. It should feel like this. And to kind of find your way back into your physical somatic center is so helpful.
And we need to know our cores. I mean, that's where we get the core of our beings. That's where we get our own sense of who we are and be able to follow that with integrity.
Yeah.
And that's a really big issue right now. One point I want to make, I'm glad you brought up centering prayer, because one of the things I love about the labyrinth is any meditation method you've used, like in centering prayer, you use a repeated phrase. You used to be called a sacred phrase, and that you repeat it and repeat it and repeat it until your mind quiets slowly, and then you sort of let go of the phrase. Well, that fits into labyrinths beautifully. You can do that in the inner path that we call the 3 R's, or the releasing path as you're moving in. And then in the center, just to let go of it. And then, as the teaching goes, then you're usually in a profound sense of silence.
Yes.
So, but a repeated phrase or breath methods, all of those ways you can apply in the labyrinth.
Yeah. Yeah. And for sure, when I'm doing a physical walk of a labyrinth, that is, I find it so helpful to kind of mark the beginning, meaning like make it myself so present and aware that, okay, I'm about to enter into this space. And if I have a word or something that I want to take with me, I choose it then or acknowledge it then. And then, as you're saying, sometimes just let it go. Like I repeat it as I'm walking. Do you want to talk a little bit about what are some of the things that people do in the center of a labyrinth if they're out on a walk? What are some of the things that happen there? I've been on ones where you can literally sit in the middle or standing, or do I've also seen someone take off and run straight out. So
that's right. That's actually comes from it's folklore, but it's an active understanding up in the Scandinavian countries, where you have a classical labyrinth, different style, the Seventh Circuit classical, and the fishermen, before they go out in the day for their catch, they walk the labyrinth and then run out of the center of the labyrinth, hop on their boats and go. And with the understanding that they're kind of leaving all the bad luck or whatever in the labyrinth, leaving it behind, being cleansed.
Isn't that interesting? I had a participant at one of my walks do that. And I didn't realize that it was a thing. And I don't think she had any knowledge, but that opens up huge doors for me of like, what, is that like a past life? What just happened? That's amazing. Oh, wow. So then they could go out and leave either bad luck or whatever they were carrying with them into their day there and then go on with the task at hand. Interesting.
Yeah, that's the understanding. And that, as I understand it, from some friends that live in the UK and do a lot of research on labyrinths, that's still very actively done in the Scandinavian countries. But as far as the center, you're walking to center in a very prescribed path. And a lot of times people go, oh, I don't know about that. But it's such a complicated, circuitous path. It creates the feeling of being lost. And as many world traditions and scriptures say, you have to lose your way to find your way. And I think the labyrinth really captures that.
Yes.
But we talk about the 3 R's, as you know, releasing, receiving, returning. And the receiving part happens in the center. But, you can receive anywhere in the labyrinth. You can release anywhere in the labyrinth. Those are just kinds of instructions to help people understand. Just have a little bit of a thumbnail sketch of the labyrinth before first-time walkers go in. Because otherwise, some people are walking in and what am I doing? What am I doing? And so the 3 R's, releasing, receiving, returning has, as you know, a lot of names. Returning and recollection and resolve and reclaim and reflect and rebirth.
Yeah. Re-entry is another one.
Re-entry.
Yeah. Yeah, and it is really powerful. I think it's also really lovely along the lines of you saying in training and in your books that allowing people to experience their experience of it.
Yeah.
And maybe the different words that we're using there are part of that. But that one of the things that's so wonderful about the labyrinth is it allows people to just experience whatever it is that they experience, and that we don't have to judge these things. Because I think that's another thing that comes up, and maybe even more so now in media than ever before, that like somehow even our thoughts are wrong or we can't trust ourselves. And learning to experience things for ourselves is really a rich way of tapping back into that self-trust.
Yeah, and to experience your experience is another way, I think, of describing mindfulness. That you're in the present moment and to experience your experience. And see, it's easy. We're taught not to experience our experience, which is exactly what you're saying. Don't trust yourself. Yeah. You look out, you're thinking wrong, what's wrong with you, and all the judgments that can come in. Because we're supposed to be something different than we are, of course. Whether it's advertising telling us that we're not using the right toothpaste, or we're driving the wrong car so we don't look really, really snazzy and jazzy and all sorts of things as socially acceptable, basically. So really being able to trust what comes in and just being able to listen to it. And see, we're taught, just like you're saying, oh, I just thought that was my, I get a one-word guidance. And, the heck with that.
That's not real.
Yeah. Is it real? Yeah. And it is real. And to trust it. And that doesn't mean you act on it, but it might. But you evaluate it. You reflect on it. You think about it. Maybe journal about it. But usually, if there's a nudge, something nudging us on the path, it appears again and again until we finally pay attention to it.
Yes. And if I kind of had a very self-reflective moment there when you were talking about advertising, because on my own path, I was a project manager in advertising for many years. I started kind of with religious studies in seminary and then found my way to advertising and then have since come back out of that place. And it is true. I mean, that was my existential question of what am I doing? And maybe it came out of the labyrinth, who knows? But what am I doing all week that I'm telling people that they shouldn't trust themselves in making purchasing decisions or that they need something else in their life? And then on the weekends, I'm leading retreats where I'm trying to deprogram people from that very same messaging that it was very, existential. So I think the labyrinth also represents that for so many of us is a way to go inward to figure out what's important and then figure out, as you're saying, how can I bring either that word or something I've learned or what I desire to have more of into my life.
Yes. I think one of the powerful things is that the insights we get in the labyrinth are grounded in the body.
Yes.
So it's not necessarily something you have to remember. Oh yeah, what was that? I mean, that might be true, and that's why sometimes it's helpful to journal your labyrinth experiences. But a deep insight that comes through the body as well, and it's yours. It's yours.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And then it helps move you along toward the direction that we need to go.
I'm kind of having an existential moment right here, just thinking about all of those times and how the labyrinth was involved. Like, I cannot really question that. It's just coming to me in a new way. That's really interesting.
You know, I like your example about here you're working in advertising all week and just, oh, you need this. Oh, you need this. You really need this to be a full person, And then in your retreats, you're saying, trust yourself. It's going to emerge from within. That's great. Talk about polarities.
Yeah, it's truly weird. Yeah, buy this car wax. No, don't. Yeah, it was very interesting, and then kind of led to its own place of self-discovery with some other steps along the way, of course. But now I'm really honored that I get to do some of the work, and it's funny because once I've said yes to the labyrinth and the facilitator training, I mean I've led one online and then I started asking questions, and the answers when I ask, hey, would you like someone to help you do this? Or have you thought about, in one case, having a labyrinth at a summer camp? The answer is, oh my gosh, yes. And it's like, okay, so now I'm going to keep taking these steps.
Right. And that's all you need to do. Keep putting one foot in front of yourself and one foot in front of each other and follow the energy. Follow the excitement, follow the energy, because the labyrinth wants to come in. I mean, that's what I meant by I felt I was guided to Grace Cathedral. I was guided through Grace Cathedral. I was guided to the labyrinth, and it wants to come in. I never imagined when we first started this work that we would have two labyrinths at Grace Cathedral, one indoors, one out. And there's many, we have about on our labyrinth locator, go to the Veriditas website. Mm-hmm. And go to the labyrinth locator through that, because there's so much on that website about labyrinths. But there's about 6,000 labyrinths listed on that. And we're in 88 countries now. There's 88 countries have labyrinths.
So I will link up to the World Labyrinth Locator. And that would be something that if somebody's listening, they're like, hey, I got to try this out. I thought labyrinths were amazing. And no, now I really want to go walk one. Go check that out and maybe look ahead to just make sure that they're still open because, of course, there's social distancing concerns. But yeah, I think the best way to just try it is to go walk one without any expectations of what it might mean and just feel it for yourself. It's funny that I said feel it, but experience it for yourself.
Yeah, experience it. And that's the hard part, not to have any expectations. That's why on the Veriditas website, there's a lot of information, including basic instructions. Yeah. That doesn't take a lot. You just follow the path. And a lot of outdoor labyrinths, they're not crowded with people.
Right.
So you could turn up there and check it out.
Well, and I really do love what you just said about follow the energy. I feel like that's such a thing that we've been taught over our programming as humans to kind of ignore, but just in life in general, even not if it's specific to the labyrinth, of following the energy and seeing where it leads you and what's exciting you and what's bringing you joy. So, yeah, this is such a delight to talk about all this with you.
Well, and I think that is the essence of true joy, is that you're on a path and you're following it and you're listening to nudges, listening deeply, and then you realize that things start responding. I mean, I cannot tell you how many people wrote to me in the beginning when Walking the Sacred Path came out that the book literally fell out, either hit them on the head or fell at their feet, you know. And those were the days when people didn't know what a labyrinth was necessarily. Now a fair amount do, but it's a big world. It's a very big world.
One of the things that I've been asking guests about in season 6, it's my theme is finding joy in the messy middle, which has some interesting things there going on with labyrinths. Is the middle messy? I don't know. It feels like it's maybe a little more organized in a labyrinth, so that might be not be where we head. But like, how have you found joy in the messy middle? You know, whether that be something that stands out early from the AIDS epidemic or some other place.
I mean, I think we are in the messy middle, so to speak, not necessarily of the labyrinth, but of life right now, and COVID and all the racial tensions and all that's going on politically. Good heavens. So go toward what feeds you. Go toward what nourishes you. I think that's a really important piece. Go toward, and sometimes because we're taught to ignore our experience and figure out what we're supposed to buy instead of experience, to go toward what nurtures you. It may be nature, really important. And if you're really distressed, you know, find a place, a grassy place somewhere, and lay your belly on the ground.
Yeah.
Just lay down on the ground and breathe it in. Really important. But great music, good books, anything that feeds you and nurtures you is really important right now. More so than, you know, any other time, probably, partly because of the distressing news. And so to keep finding your core and keep feeding it. And if you're not sure, I think the people that I feel the most concerned about, Paula, are the people who are scared to be alone.
Yeah.
And, you know, with this enforced, people have been using the word lockdown. To me, that means you have an ankle bracelet on, you're not allowed to go out of the house. But
it's
sheltering in place, that I think it's been toughest on them. Disconnected from their friends, the really extroverted person, people who are out there and are nourished by meeting people and being with people.
Yeah.
There's a lot of wonderful, more extroverted meditation methods, soul coulage, for instance, where you're using collage, you're using working with images. That's one. A Zentangle is coming in, learning to draw just any design, and repeat it. Also adult coloring books. Anything that's easy and accessible if you're frightened of being alone and it's uncomfortable to be alone. Those methods may be very helpful.
I appreciate that. Yeah. I'm kind of an outgoing introvert. And so I do miss my time with people, but it's also been such an interesting experience probably for a lot of empaths and people who are highly intuitive. Like there's also a layer of this that, like there's a little too much to feel every day if you're, really intuitive. And I really feel for people who are highly extroverted that this is just a lot to try and be in a space that's not so comfortable. Yeah.
Yeah, it certainly is. It is. And I think it's important, too, to mention that the labyrinth really balances people. It's not always deep and insightful. It's peace-giving. You get a sense of, because, you're turning in the Chartres labyrinth, you're turning left, you're turning right, you're turning left, 28 times going into center, 28 times coming back out the same path. And it has this kind of balancing. I'm sure it does with the brain, just left, right. It's almost like being in a cradle, rocked in a cradle,
That's so nice. We're both waving back and forth too. As you say that, like, yes, wouldn't that be nice to be rocked to sleep? Yeah. And so before we get to the final questions, I think we should also talk a little bit about, and I'll hold up my own hand labyrinth. He's a little bit sideways there, or she is, who knows? But I recently experienced these for the first time with your training, and I know that Veriditas is offering a free hand labyrinth walk each Friday, at least for right now. And would you share a little bit about that? And how is it different? How is it the same? Because I know some people may not be able to find in winter or whatever a labyrinth near them to physically walk with their feet. What's the history behind a hand labyrinth?
Early on, when I first started the work at Grace Cathedral, that would be 91, we opened the canvas on the New Year's Eve 24-hour event, Singing for Your Life, and we had that with Bobby McFerrin. Those days, 10 years we did this. From there, we opened it, and it was partly because Bobby was there, but also we announced the Labyrinth opening, and people were just so hungry for it. Yeah. And then later, we began to open it at Grace Cathedral, as I mentioned, the first Sunday in silence, the third Wednesday evening and with music. And then people who were visually challenged started turning up and wanting to walk the labyrinth, which I kind of naively then, that's fine with me, and offered my elbow and led them through the labyrinth. But it was a total disorientation. It really was not helpful for me to do that. So I began to experiment with smaller, just handheld labyrinths. And what I used to do is I would get, a molding, a half-inch molding, and I think I had a friend put these together on a board, so 18 by 18 inches, and use celluclay. And celluclay, an art product, it's like cake mix. You just add water, and I'd spread it in there, and then I'd teach myself how to draw it. Not that I could draw a Chartres labyrinth even now, but in the celluclay, stake it out with toothpicks. The directions and draw this in, and it fits 18 inches, fits the width of a finger. They're grooved, it's grooved, and just like this one is. And so then someone actually suggested, we call them finger meditation tools at that point. Yeah. And we always, as you know, with facilitators who we train, always encourage people to have them, at least one available in some form during an event. It would be an in-person event. But then with COVID, one of our wonderful board members, Stephanie Reeves, suggested that we just do an online handheld labyrinth meditation every week. And we've been doing it since COVID. I think we'll probably continue, because the beauty of it is online, people can join from anywhere in the world. On our website, we alternate. One time it's at 4 o'clock, the other time it's at 12 p.m., 12 noon. Partly because of the UK and Europe joining us, and then on the other earlier time, the Pacific Rim joining us. And so we're kind of doing every other week that way. But it's a free event. You just sign up on the Veriditas website. And what we're finding is it really very meaningful. It is. Not only in light of community being online together, but it's certainly a way of teaching people to find the Grail Castle, to be in that liminal realm. Right. But there's an art to that too. There's an art to dismissing your everyday thoughts. I have to get cat food for my cat, and I have to do this and that, and those kind of thoughts, into allowing yourself to really connect with your breath. And we encourage any way like that. Someone who's familiar with the breath meditation might do that in order to do the handheld labyrinth walk. Yeah. And we play music, as you know. We play music, and then there's a time for sharing. Usually there's a theme. The facilitator introduces a theme. It's actually worked out very, very well, and in a lovely way. And see, for me, that's kind of a new discovery, because I always had a labyrinth to walk.
Right.
So I didn't use handheld labyrinths much at all.
Isn't that interesting?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and I have to say, I hadn't used one until facilitator training. And then I actually found that I really love the classical for the handheld. But that to me was easier for me to do. And I was totally kind of surprised and delighted to see that it was something that was so meaningful when I couldn't physically walk a space. Would you share, where can people find the signups if they want to do either the handheld walks each Friday or want to find out more about you? Where could they get in touch?
Sure. So it's the website for Veriditas. It's obviously www. And then it's spelled this way: veriditas.org.
Thank you.
So that has lots of labyrinth information on it. It's also our events. We are planning, hopefully, and I think it will happen, to be back in Chartres in September. So, because we've gone to these pilgrimages, we always have groups come over and join us in Chartres Cathedral.
Yeah.
And we are doing a lot of workshops online too. And I also have my own private online website, just laurenartress.com. And there's more information there. It's connected to Veriditas,
Yeah.
but also information about the Holy Fool and things like that.
Yes, and I'll link up to all that and the Holy Fool book. Yeah, such good stuff. And I got goosebumps when you said you're going back. Oh, that would be so amazing. This has been such a treat. I don't want to end, but it's kind of time for the last question.
All right, okay.
So the thing that I ask everyone before we close out is, what are 3 ways that you can think of to jumpstart joy in your life, in the world, or in other people's lives?
Yeah, it's a lovely question, and I love your phrase "jumpstart." Great metaphor, right?
Yeah, thank you.
So, like you jumpstart a car or something. Yeah, I think that the main one, go toward what feeds you. I think that's one thing. Reach out, even if you can't be physically with somebody. Reach out and call someone, especially if you're feeling lonely or just kind of your energy's really low. I'd certainly say find a labyrinth if you can and when you can, and join the online. I mean, that's free. It's a free event. There's hundreds of people on it. It's fabulous, and it's guided. It's led, and that's another option. But also to see joy as a byproduct. It's not something you don't necessarily have to go directly toward. I mean, our pets, our animals, that's one joyous thing about this pandemic, is that our adoption agencies and all the SPCA, they're empty.
Yeah.
They don't have any animals. They're low on animals. Isn't that great?
Amazing.
That all these animals have found a home. And maybe that's another way to jumpstart joy, is find something you love, and if you don't have that with you, maybe consider a pet.
Oh, Lauren, this has been such a true treat and a joy to have you on the show. Thank you so much for joining me today.
You're very welcome. Thank you for having me. You take care.
Thank you.
Keep with your joy. Keep with your joy.